All of the contributions really served as a very pertinent reminder of the social crisis, the real day-to-day impact of what we're talking about here today, the reality of what unemployment means, the reality of what living on social welfare means for individuals, their families, their communities, and indeed for the broader society and economy. As I said, we have a few minutes for questions, comments.
Hello. One comment, Tom. I'm glad you used the word political economy. One time courses in universities were called political economy. Then I know in one university at some stage the word political was dropped from the title of the courses. So I think if we always use the term political economy, it's all about choices. And there's no TINA, right? TINA being there is no alternative. The other question I wanted to ask, I would not be very hopeful. What is it about Irish people? I'm only going on a market research study done recently, which said that only 27%, I think, of people interviewed said they would favour increases in taxes rather than spending cuts. That rose to 29% in the Dublin area. What is it about Irish people that even when the 50-50 model of 50% cuts, 50% increase in taxation was proposed, it doesn't seem to be getting anywhere?
Okay, thank you. Cathal.
An unfair question anyway, but particularly unfair for Tom, given that he's only 2 weeks in the job, but possibly also unfair for Sinéad. But how do either of your organisations see the kind of discussions we're having here today moving into and influencing those who call the shots, whether they're the permanent government or the elected government of the day?
Okay, I'm going to give each of the speakers a minute to either say something they didn't get to say earlier on or to respond to the questions. Perhaps, Tom, we'll give you the floor first.
Just in relation to the issue of tax and popular support for tax increases, I guess a lot of people rightly feel that money was wasted and that they've little control over public expenditure decisions, and there is that sense of distrust maybe which is not so much historically the case in Scandinavian countries for various reasons. And I think it's necessary in the future to build a much stronger consensus that public expenditure and indeed, may I say, social universalism is a good thing, and that it's a decent society that does these things. In terms of how to move it forward, I feel like saying the following, actually, that I don't know if anyone is over the age of 65 in this audience, but the people who really scare me are the over 65s, because there were two issues on which the government climbed down in the last 3 years that I can remember. One was medical cards, and you know the story. A mob took over a church here in Dublin and said and did naughty things, and the government backed down. And you know what? 90% of them vote in elections, and less than 50% of people under the age of 25 vote in elections. That's CSO, QNHS data. So I think the future of the country is with the elderly people who are going to give a lead. And I would be surprised, frankly, but mark my words, maybe I'm wrong, I would be surprised if the government took on the older people in the comprehensive expenditure review and the state pension. But they'll take on young people, and they'll take on families again, and the lone parents and people on unemployment. I think we just have to get our act together, and I think the Wobblies had it right: organise, mobilise and educate.
Okay, just a couple of comments on the tax issue. We do have an unusual relationship with tax in this country, and I suppose, again, like Tom, it's a lack of transparency about where our taxes go and the kind of services we get for the taxes. So as part of responses to the crisis will involve us becoming a normal economy in terms of taxation. But I think part of that there has to be more transparency about taxation, where are taxes going, and what types of services are they funding. So I think that's a critical part of changing people's attitudes to tax. And I suppose it's not helped by the fact that at the moment a lot of our taxation is going into bailing out banks. So we certainly have an uphill battle in that regard. Just on the Cath's question on influence, We're all trying to do that, but this event is part of that process, and there were people involved in the political system here today. We hope they'll take some of those ideas back to the Oireachtas. Also, in terms of, I think there's a push and pull factor in terms of having the meetings and the one-to-ones. That's in terms of making the case, the evidence-based case, but also the push, asking the hard questions. What are you doing? How are you doing it? I was at a meeting earlier on this week with a minister, and she was saying, you need to be talking about the particular issue more. It has to be, you have to make us all do it, I suppose is what she was saying. So I think we all have a role to play. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm a sociologist, not an economist, so as you may have noticed, I don't believe in national stereotypes. I think those are things that change. So I don't believe there is something inbuilt into the Irish psyche that makes Irish people unwilling to pay tax. I think these things change. One of the reasons, undoubtedly, for resistance to taxation at the moment is the feeling that expenditure is not always well spent. And let us be honest here amongst progressives. It's a small thing in terms of total effect, but it has enormous consequences where trade unions are seen to enforce working conditions and which disrupt or hinder the effective service of public services. I'm thinking of some of the things that go on in the transport sector, in health or whatever. That really has all the extreme negative consequences. But I think far more important and much more recent is the worship of individual entrepreneurs and individual businessmen and the odd woman who are now wheeled out as the saviors of the society. This sort of linkage of glamour, personality, and leading business people is a relatively new phenomenon. You find it in the US and the UK for about 15 years. We've had it here for about 10 years. And I think it has enormous impact on the implication on people's readiness to pay tax, because these are the people who are seen, who argue in public against taxation. These are the people whose wealth, bizarrely, is used to legitimate the new sorts of inequality. Hope that's of some use.
Firstly, I think that we need to very much agree with the analogy with wobblies that Tom referred to. We need to educate and promote ideas that we're absolutely convinced of, which I think will generate change, and that's part of how we may impact on policy. Cutting social welfare expenditure, for example, has a far more regressive impact than increasing taxation. And the more that people in general know that and are aware of that fact, the more willing they will be to accept increased taxation rather than reductions in expenditure of that kind. The fact that corporate profit tax rates in Ireland is 12.5% is also part of reluctance of ordinary consumers to increase their tax payments. And while so large a proportion of the Irish population seems to think that 12.5% is some kind of holy grail that cannot be increased, I think that we, again, among progressives, can accept the fact that there's nothing special about 12.5%, and it should certainly be considered as a possibility for increasing it, especially in the context of profit switching, transfer pricing, and all the other kinds of aspects of behaviour of subsidiaries of multinationals that hopefully we'll be reporting on in our industrial policy research. Thank you.
Thank you. And just by way of information, the community platform working with TASC this week launched a document setting out a 10-year phased reform of the tax system, which hopes to answer some of these questions as well, and again is another contribution to a debate that really needs to happen, and to challenge some of the assumptions around the dogma of the low tax economy. I'm going to close there, 3 minutes over our time, but not doing too badly.